And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday Brunch. We're here with Richard from Rejoin EU, and we're waiting for Brendan Donley to connect. Brendan is having some technical problems, but we're going to keep an eye on that. So I want to say thanks for everyone for coming on. I hope you're having a great Sunday. Thanks also to Alex, my co-host, doing a wonderful job as always. Richard, for people maybe who are not familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself and about Rejoin EU and maybe how people can support Rejoin EU?
Totally. Thank you, Max, and thank you, Alex, for inviting me on today. My name is Richard Hewison, and I am currently the leader of the Rejoin EU party. We exist, basically, names and clues in the name, to promote the idea of rejoining the EU. We think that when you make a mistake, you just own up and say, yeah, it's really not going terribly well, let's change our minds. And we exist because a lot of the mainstream political parties, even those who are coming a little bit closer to wanting to rejoin the EU, don't really want to talk about it, don't really want to have the arguments, don't really want to make the case. And one of the reasons I'm delighted to be on here today is because I'm going to be plugging our fundraiser today. Next week, we're going to be launching a fundraiser, the aim of which is to try to make sure every time we have one of these by-elections coming up, even if we don't stand, people are getting information about why leaving the EU is affecting them, why Brexit is still problematic, and to make sure we keep up the pressure on the mainstream political parties to do something about it.
That's a good way to get a political party galvanised and orientated in a direction. It's simple, straight to the point, get it done.
Well, I like to think at least we're quite honest about what our policies are. We only have two: rejoin the EU, and we don't like bigotry and intolerance. So that's our two policies.
Fantastic. And you also ran for the London Mayor position as well, didn't you?
I did.
Which was an interesting campaign.
It was an interesting campaign, yes. Obviously, it was right at the heart of COVID. So it was a campaign run in a very, very different way to how we imagined the campaign running, and a much more digital campaign than most campaigns that have been before. But yes, it was a good experience. And the reaction we got from many, many people in London, even if they thought, well, with only 2 votes and 20 candidates, sorry, we can't give you one of our votes. They very, very much appreciated the issue. And one of the great things about the hustings in the mayoral elections that I did attend was the number of candidates from other parties that said, you know what, we agree with you entirely on this. It's just that it's not our big issue, so we're not going to be talking about it much.
Fantastic. And we're also joined by Brendan Donley from the Federal Trust. Brendan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Great to have you on. We had some technical issues, but we seem to have had them resolved now. Well done. Can you?
Good. I don't know who the hackers were. Perhaps it was Mr. Putin or whatever. Well, anyway, whoever it was. Very nice to be here. I'm Brendan Donnelly. I'm the director of the Federal Trust, which is a pro-EU, not just pro-European, pro-EU think tank based in London. I'm a former Conservative MEP, and the former applies to being a Conservative and being an MEP.
Brendan, we're still having some problems with you. Maybe you can switch off your camera for a little bit, and we can try because.
I'm neither of those.
Oh no!
Things.
I laugh there. Yeah, that is definitely definitely Putin work.
Well, I'm not so sure actually, because it was the moment he said former Conservative MEP,
I think
that
many people
the sound went. So
we'll just give Brent. Oh, we lost Brendan.
Brendan.
Okay.
We lost Brendan.
Okay, we'll continue. Apologies.
We're down to 3.
We're down to 3. And we had Brendan earlier on, and everything was fine, and then he started to have some technical problems. So we'll move ahead. I'll keep an eye on if Brendan is able to jump back in. Otherwise, we can bring him back at another stage, definitely in the future. Just on that, Alex, can you tell us about maybe the future of the Sunday Brunch?
Yeah, this is great news. We're going to a new channel. We're going to create a new channel because of the popularity and the number of people that have been watching. And we're going to create a new channel called the Sunday Roast. and we'll make sure there's a link in the description at the end of this video that you'll be able to click on and subscribe to. So please do that, because we're going to make this its own channel and sort of devote everything towards having a panel show every Sunday. And we're going to be back from September this year.
Great.
So that also means this is our penultimate show, which is interesting.
So maybe we should ask the chat who they'd like to see return for the final show. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd love to see who folks would like to actually get back on for that final show. I'm sure, Richard, you're going to plug. Successfully. You've got a major advantage today, Richard.
That's true. That's true. But I can promise you, if I'm back next week, there'll be a lot of talk about our fundraiser again, now that it will be live at that stage. So perhaps I might be over-promoting, possibly.
Sorry, go on, Alex.
We're already getting people coming in and saying stuff. We've got all sorts and Phil from a different bias as well being thrown at us. Those are the first two. But yeah, Farage. He was never on. We would love to have had him on. I mean, I don't think this is his cup of tea, and I don't think he stands a chance, to be honest.
Farage and Putin would make a good combination next week if you can get them.
I'd love to say more about that, but I'd probably be, after Farage was so angry with the last comments, I'd probably get sued. Was it Chris Bryant, the MP, that pulled that one out the bag in comments and said that he'd been taking bungs from Vladimir Putin? Did anyone miss that?
No, I didn't see that. That's interesting.
Oh, you didn't see that? Yeah, Farage went absolutely ballistic. He was like, I dare you. I'm pretty sure it's Chris Bryant. Apologies if it's not. But Chris Bryant used his parliamentary privilege to say that Aaron Banks and Nigel Farage had been taking bungs from Vladimir Putin.
Wow.
Directly or indirectly, it wasn't clear. And Farage then went on the channel, on his channel, and just went absolutely nuts and was like, I dare him to say that outside of Parliament. Of course, Chris Bryant didn't, but interesting nonetheless. And then on GB News that evening, Farage then ranted even more, being like, total nonsense, all rubbish. Of course, completely ignoring, along with his guests, the fact that the FBI want to speak to Nigel, and he came up in the Russia report in the UK and the Russia reports in the US. So that's interesting.
It is.
But of course,
I always think it's very interesting when someone uses their parliamentary privilege to do that and then doesn't repeat it outside. I wonder if it's sort of almost like a call for evidence. So if people can corroborate what Brian said in Parliament, he's hoping they'll contact him before he actually says something outside. Because obviously, if he is sued, it would be very interesting to see it go to court. But I think you'd need some quite good evidence to make sure you could.
Yeah, I mean, there's the stuff that I've seen. It's essentially I've read and looked at in all the reports, and it's not just that. There are think tanks also raised concerns. Most of it seems to be vague connections. There's nothing that's been brought up that's direct. This is Nigel. This is it's not a silver bullet. He's not a werewolf. What's the
smoking gun?
Smoking gun. Thank you.
We have Brendan back. Brendan, I don't know if can you hear us?
Yes, I can, and I'm really sorry about the technical problems. I hope they're resolved now.
I hope so. So if you'd like to just give us a quick introduction once again, so about the Federal Trust and your involvement. So you were telling us that you used to be a member of the European Parliament, and that's where we sort of lost you. So if you'd like
Yes, I used to be a Conservative member of the European Parliament, and I'm neither of those things anymore. I'm not a Conservative. I'm not a member of the European Parliament. And indeed, I think that one of the reasons why British politics and British European politics have taken a wrong turn over the past 20 years is precisely because the Conservative Party has lost any sense of measure or moderation on the subject of Europe, which has then generalized itself throughout the whole of Conservative policy. Partygate and the very poor handling of COVID seem to me to be entirely of a piece with the philosophy of Brexit, which is one based on self-delusion in different ways. Federal Trust is a think tank, I'll just briefly say, which is interested in non-national levels of government. We're interested in regionalism and devolution, but we're also interested in supranational government, because we think federalism is a rational philosophy for the 21st century, where everything is done at the most appropriate level of government, sometimes supranational, sometimes subnational, sometimes regional, sometimes national. But the important thing is that there should be an agreement and discussion about what level of government is the most appropriate level of government for anything to be carried out. And we think obviously that the European Union is the appropriate level for many things which are of interest to Europeans.
I thought, sorry.
No, go ahead, Alex. Go ahead.
I was thinking about this the other day because, Brendan, you did a video with the Rejoin EU party, who are obviously, this is our focus for today. And I wondered if you had two Scotlands, and we're going to go multiverse, I like the Marvel universe, they've just done a movie about the multiverse. If you had Scotland in one universe, which was in the EU, but not in the UK, and then in the other, in our reality, on Earth 616, as they say in Marvel, you would have what we have now. Where does in which one of those two scenarios does Scotland have more rights and ability to influence government politics? Does it have actually more rights and influence to govern its own politics inside the EU than it does inside the Union?
We've lost Brandon again. Oh, no. Okay, go ahead.
I'm very sorry. I just don't know what's...
Oh.
Well, Brendan, sorry.
But I'll plough on. I think Scotland would have more right. No.
No, you keep cutting out. Apologies.
Sorry, Brendan. That's a real shame.
I think I'll have to leave and leave you to it, and I'm very sorry indeed.
I'm very sorry that we will try and get you back maybe at a later stage. Apologies once again.
That would be very nice, and I do appreciate it. But you can't carry on now.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brendan.
It's such a pity, because there are so many things we'd like to ask you today, but unfortunately, it's not going to be possible. We'll let Brendan go. Richard, for example, when it comes to the European Union, or maybe we could ask you that scenario. What's your take on that? The idea of Scotland, would Scotland have more powers in the European Union as an individual country, or is it better off in the Union?
Oh, that's two separate questions there, Max. So first of all, would it have more independence? I would argue yes. As a sovereign federal state within the EU framework, rather than being pretty much an appendix to the United Kingdom, yes, Scotland would. Because at the end of the day, don't forget, we still have the famous West Lothian question, in that the UK Parliament could turn around at any time it wishes and abolish the Scottish Parliament if they wish to. Now, obviously, that would be tremendously dangerous and disingenuous to do, so I'm pretty sure it wouldn't happen. But there's always that sword of Damocles hanging over a Scotland that's part of the United Kingdom. Now, in terms of whether they're better off, now, of course, you can always argue that access to the single market, access to the customs union, access to a far, far greater range of opportunities for the Scottish people would make them better off anyway within the EU. I would probably argue that the optimum scenario for Scotland would be having a more settled federal status within the United Kingdom, and at the same time, the whole United Kingdom rejoining the EU. That would be, I think, the best situation for most of us, quite frankly.
Alex, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with those points. I think it's just interesting when you essentially the two unions. You've got the Union of the UK and you've got the Union of the EU. Where do they have more rights? Well, if they're in the EU, they've got complete control of their borders. They've got some say at the table as to what's going on in the wider picture. Whereas within the UK, it's not even a properly federalised system. So, it would make more sense if England had its own parliament, and then Scotland had a parliament, and Wales had a parliament, and Northern Ireland had its parliament operating, and then Westminster was only in charge of essentially the same sort of things as what Congress and the president are in charge of within the United States. And they're sort of in charge of, essentially like making sure everything's as coordinated as possible. But we don't even have that. And I'm just looking at it and going, wait a minute, like Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland have less say inside our union than they would inside the European Union. But the whole point of Brexit was they'd have more democratic rights. And it's like, well, they have less. And I'm not sure. I don't think I've heard this. Which situation are you more in control of your own destiny as a country? And it's as you said, it's the West Lothian question. How much power does Westminster have? And also on top of that, if Scotland says, "Oh, we want to change something," they've got to go to a negotiating table. Well, at least within the European Union, they get to vote on that on a regular basis. It's up to Westminster to decide as to whether or not they even hear the Scottish people and what they want in their parliament. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think I've even heard the SNP actually try and say, actually, we've got more rights inside the EU than we do in this union. Am I wrong there? Has anyone else heard that?
Well, I don't think they said that because they can't demonstrate it because they're not a member of the European Union at this stage. But for example, there are the devolved powers and there are the reserved powers. So, for example, if it is an independent country, it would have all of the powers. So it wouldn't have powers that would be devolved from Parliament or reserved by Parliament in London. So definitely, even if it didn't, it would be like Ireland. It would be almost like comparing Scotland today with Ireland today, and comparing Scotland today with Ireland in the past, where control was from Westminster. So unfortunately, I think it would be good to have someone from Scotland on to give their opinion. Maybe we can do that in the future as well.
Yeah. One thing I'd just add to that, just before moving on, we've talked quite a lot about devolved powers and powers that have come from Westminster. Let's not forget, even though it's not devolved, organisations like the London Assembly have seen interference against the wishes of the majority very, very recently. For example, Priti Patel just pushed through a bill in Parliament changing the way London elects its mayor and its assembly, and also changing the way mayors are elected citywide. Now, the majority of MPs in London voted against that. The majority of the Assembly in London are against it. So this is just an example of how, if Westminster feels it's in a powerful enough position, it will assert its authority against the wishes of the majority in the area if it chooses to do so. I think they've been very wise not to pick a fight with Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland at this particular stage. Obviously, the issue with the Northern Ireland Protocol is going to be another one of these sort of touch paper moments in the near future, according to Liz Truss.
That's maybe something that I'd like to talk about now, is the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I don't know if you... I don't know if you guys had heard this week that Liz Truss has introduced a new policy of green lanes and red lanes, which which was actually originally presented as an option by the European Commission last October. So Priti Patel, and at the time it was rejected as an idea, but now it's been sold as a British solution.
Are they selling it as their own idea again? Yeah,
a bit like the lockdowns. Remember, Keir Starmer was saying maybe we should have a lockdown back in 2020, and Boris Johnson said no, it's a bad idea. And then 2 weeks later, yeah, we're going to have another lockdown because it's a good idea.
I love how he keeps calling Keir Starmer Captain Hindsight. But it's like, well, I was surprised they haven't just called Boris Captain Chaos for a start. That's quite apt, and there's an actual South Park character who looks disturbingly like Boris.
I think Boris should be General Chaos because he's in charge of chaos across the board. And don't forget, when you have a look at his ministers as well, you've got people like Major Cockup in the finance department. You've got Major Brain Death as our foreign secretary, and Major Coke Habit as Coca-Cola, of course, there. In terms of other departments as well. So, yeah, I think when it comes to the hypocrisy of a lot of the name calling from this particular government, it's bizarre. And I don't know if you noticed this week the sort of hierarchy of drop down when it comes to giving credit. Obviously, it is windfall tax the government's now got, and Labour are going, haha, that was our idea that you took. And now the Lib Dems are going, actually, we came up with that idea, and then Labour took it. I'm wondering if one of the smaller parties is going to come out and say, actually, it was our idea, and then the Lib Dems took it. So Westminster culture is so bizarre.
The best politicians are the greatest thieves, I think is one expression. Well, I've heard the same expression used for teaching and football coaching. So, yeah, make of that as you will. It's also interesting as well, because on that note, that also means that actually eventually, if you keep hammering a decent idea, it'll get through to the people at the top, which I always find as a positive thing, regardless of the fact that it's the Tories taking on the positive idea and doing it too late, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm looking at all of this and just going, how do they still think that Brexit can still work? Got a super chat.
Yay! We got a super chat from George, who says, I'm really angry about Drax and the red meat to socialists. So I don't know if, Richard, are you familiar with that? So there's a Tory...
I'm not. What does that mean?
So there's a Tory whose name is Richard Drax. Sounds like a Bond villain or something. He's worth... I think he's worth over £100 million. He's a member of Parliament. His family own an estate in Dorset, which is about 2% of Dorset is owned by. I think it's about almost 40,000 acres, and this is the worst part: is his family made their fortune through the slave trade in Barbados, one of the countries included. And he stood up in Parliament and he said, "We can't have this windfall tax because it's throwing red meat to the socialists. So if we have windfall taxes like this, it's just going to open the floodgates."
So distasteful. First of all, I think the fact that we live in a society that tolerates the accumulation of wealth based on the slave trade and allows people to continue with it is fundamentally wrong. That money that's come from the slave trade, that wealth, should be effectively subject to a 100% tax by Parliament and used to make reparations for the long-term damage that have been done to other countries and the citizens of other countries as a result of it. So pure hypocrisy from someone like that. But that's the problem. If you've got money, you can get to Parliament. And if you can get to Parliament, you can stop people taking your money. And whilst that situation persists, I totally agree with the person who gave us the chat there. It's disgusting, totally disgusting.
I don't know. Did you see that? Did you see that, Alex?
Yeah. I didn't realize it was. I'd heard the comment before, but I hadn't heard who it had come from and their background. But it doesn't surprise me. I mean, just people are saying it. Drax was a Bond villain in Moonraker, apparently. And there's also Drax the Destroyer in Marvel. So it seems to, be connected in certain ways to a negative connotation.
And actually, sorry, just to say, I think about in the 1800s, his family was compensated for the abolition of slavery. So his family received £3,000 at the time because they, because of the not the money was not given to the slaves; it was given to the slave owners as compensation, and his family received about £3,000 back in 1800. So that was a significant amount of money.
Yeah. That's a small portion. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the records that we have the records of all the money given out. It isn't just rich people. There were people who just owned one slave. They sort of bought it as like a share of a company. Or the share of a plantation, and that enabled them to have one slave, which meant that they also got compensation. It's actually quite widespread throughout the entire United Kingdom, but people don't realise that because obviously the sums could be quite small for that time and lost until the records have been dredged up again. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. I mean, the most shocking thing is the fact that they keep coming out and saying that. Like, I've heard a number of Conservatives come out and say they don't like socialism and socialism's communism, but it's like, well, what do you think the NHS is? That's like one of the biggest socialist organisations in the world. and we developed it, and we seem to all be proud about it, and we all clap for it. But then Drax comes out and tries to destroy it.
Do you think that's true, though, that Conservatives actually are proud of the NHS, or do they just feel it's not appropriate to say what they really think of the NHS? Because let's be honest, many of the policies that Conservative governments past have done have been aimed at privatising various parts of the NHS. Even if it's not the frontline doctors and nurses in emergency departments, it's the cleaning cart staff, the catering staff, the infrastructure staff, the management of the buildings. And people like Farage, when they talk about private healthcare and the benefits of private healthcare, just seems to me to be like a slightly more honest approach of what most of the Conservatives I know seem to think anyway when it comes to the National Health Service.
It's very debatable. It wouldn't surprise me if some of them are quite proud of it. It also wouldn't surprise me if they dare not say anything about it because they know it's a vote loser. And if there's any indication that they're trying to privatise it, which they already have. I mean, the cleaners, the fact that was all privatised and no one had twigged that actually we need decent cleaners making sure they do a really good job to keep the hygiene levels up in hospital. And no one in government thought, yeah, probably not the best of ideas to like privatise that and just have a race to the bottom in terms of wages. It beggars belief, but it also shows the privatisation that's going on, or that GPs are privatised still. You know, they're not actually NHS; they are a separate entity, and that's partly historical. It does beg questions, and it seems like one of the biggest ironies as well about this is if you've got a privatised system, it's actually harder to deal with something like COVID. So there's a number of Harvard papers that have been released from Harvard lecturers and doctors who worked abroad during COVID that said, if you've got a centralized system, it's really easy to implement change at the top, especially in a pandemic. If it's privatized, you've got to get everyone together and get everyone coordinated. And considering we've just had this, it shows actually like the importance of the NHS, but it also shows the importance of having pre-prepped everything and not privatized everything, especially in key areas. So I'm a bit mixed about it because I'm sure there are Tory MPs out there who do consider the NHS to be a big privilege. And I'm sure there are Tory MPs out there that would want it gone and are trying to do it by stealth. And it's to the detriment of everyone. And the other example I give is I've had friends in California who, this must have been about 10, 15 years ago, their truck flipped over. They had no insurance because they were all unemployed and they were all young. And so they didn't have jobs. I think it was one summer. And the ambulance turned up and they told the ambulance driver to go away because they wouldn't be able to afford the hospital bill, which to give you...
Was this in the USA?
Yeah, California. £1,000 per x-ray.
Wow.
$1,000 per x-ray. And that was 10 years ago. In theory, it should be cheaper, but God only knows. I've got friends out there that had major operations and they couldn't afford it, so they had to get a credit card, which then puts them in debt forever. I'm sure many Tories want most of the public in debt so that they can't have time to think about the politics or the crazy policies that they're putting forward, or even deal with those crazy policies because they're so busy trying to pay off the debt. And, you know, it cripples the economy doing stuff like that. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer.
But just as you brought up credit card debt, it reminded me of a problem that in the US, and it's a problem in both parties, the corruption in both parties. For example, I think it was Joe Biden. Joe Biden is obviously the president today, but when he was a senator, or as far as I know, he was receiving donations from MBNA. MBNA being one of the biggest credit card companies in the world. And, you know, this whole idea that you have a credit card company providing, you know, funding a political campaign. What is the motivation behind that? Obviously, it's to make it easier for these credit card companies to get people into debt, because once they're in debt, then you have this, you know, continuous flow of money coming into your company. And there were attempts to clamp down on the availability of these credit cards because they were giving them out to pretty much anyone. Now it's different to what you were talking about, but it just triggered something in my mind about you know, the fact that we need to get the money out of politics. That's the first step.
Yeah.
What do people think then in terms of political funding? What is the optimum way, in your view, for funding political parties?
I would say we need to have publicly funded political parties. So every party receives. I don't know the full details of it or how it exactly work, but I think political parties provide are a necessity, so they should be publicly funded, because otherwise you have multimillionaires dumping money in the Conservatives, or the fact that you can make a donation to Boris Johnson to the value of £100,000 and play tennis with him. The influence that person has over policy, and we heard about there was committees set up, internal Tory party committees, where donors would be attending. This is insane, and they would be deciding policy basically. So if you have a lot of money, you have more power than a block of voters, and this is extremely concerning for me. So I would say a publicly funded political parties. If we don't want to go that way, there was Andrew Yang in the US who had this idea. I think it was a nice idea as well. It was called Patriot Dollars or something like that. So what you do is every citizen would be given £10, for example, and they would be able to donate this £10 to whatever political party they wanted. So it would level the playing field in a way. So it would eliminate donations to private donations, but you would have a set amount of dollars that you could. So if there's a party like Rejoin EU, which needs funding, you can make your donations to that. Or if you want to donate to the Conservatives or the Labour Party, whoever, and it stops the idea that you have big donors dumping tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds into a party. It allows everyone to donate, and it's money that you can't keep for yourself, so it has to go to a political party. But I think we also need proportional representation before that happens, because.
Oh, absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Max. Nothing is going to happen while we have a situation of first past the post, where one party or other can see itself being dominant with a minority of the votes. Particularly, we've always had a democratic deficit. I think the only government that could just about claim majority support was the coalition in 2010 to 2015. Every other government that we've had in my lifetime has been based on a minority of votes taking a 100% stake of the decisions. And when we have a look at what we can see now the Conservative Party doing, the legislative agenda for next year looks horrific. And none of it was raised or prominent at the 2019 election. And yet, with 44% of the vote, they have 100% of the political power. You're right, it's just wrong.
Yeah, the whole system is up the creek. I mean, when we were in the EU, at least you had some sort of representation with having an MEP, which was proportional. So that meant you felt as if you had some influence over what was going on in European policy, even if you were being ignored within your own country. And then you could also talk about the fact that, we've lost 2 Supreme Courts. We might want to argue that there was a 2005 court case which sort of suggested that actually the courts gave Parliament power. So we've got this very interesting scenario where Parliament's claiming they've got power. There's lots of individuals claiming it's sovereignties within the people, and we've got the courts claiming that they've got power. But without a codified constitution, which is something I'm a big advocate for, the courts lose a lot of their power and influence, especially when it's all focused inside the Commons. There's very few checks on the Prime Minister. And we've seen that. We've seen that with Partygate. It's just carried on. It's like, I don't have to leave as long as I've got the cabinet behind me, as long as I've got my politicians behind me.
But it's not just that. He's turning around and dismantling the code in front of us now. So having pretty much got away with it, he's now announcing that ministers will no longer have to resign if they are caught doing minor discretions. And I don't know what you understand by a minor indiscretion, but organising an illegal gathering at the height of a pandemic against the own rules that we've set, if that's a minor breach, then, well, I think
Richard, it was just cake, okay? Stop, blowing it out of all proportion. Just a piece of cake, okay? Before we continue, I just want to read out some super chats. Dr. Johan, thank you so much for that super chat. Gareth MacDonald says, Kate Hoey in the House of Lords. Anyone who's opposed to Boris Johnson is inherently biased against because they're Ramoners. And for your information, Kate Hoey is anti-protocol but pro-Boris Johnson. Yes. Kate Hoey is a. I don't know if any of you have watched Kate Hoey in the House of Lords. It's a cure for insomnia. She stands there, blah 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 for about 20 minutes about all sorts of things, and I was considering doing some response videos to it, but it's just really boring. It's not because I disagree with Kate Hoey, but it's just really really boring what she has to say. No, sorry, that's not Kate Hoey. That's Claire Fox. Claire Fox is the boring one.
It's so easy to confuse them. All these people who aren't actually members of the Conservative Party but support Boris happen to be in the House of Lords. Jenny Jones from the Green Party, they found the one Brexiter in the Green Party to put in the House of Lords as well. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Thanks, Gareth.
Sorry, go ahead, Max. We've got another super chat.
I just read out the next one from Alexander. Thanks so much, Alexander. The Treasury Department in 2015 tweeted, "Thanks to the public for ending the slave trade." Turns out we're compensating slaver descendants until 2015. All freedom of information requests were rejected. Yeah, that was a scandal. The descendants of slave owners were still receiving compensation up to 2015. Just think about that.
I thought that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought it was that the government had taken out a loan and they were paying back the loan companies, not because the descendants had already been paid.
They had been paid, but there were still payments being made indirectly to slave owners since until 2015. Yeah, so it was a loan that was taken out. But it's still insane, the idea that the people who were running the slave trade were being compensated and not the slaves themselves. And then
go on.
No, just read out one more super chat. And remember, we're up to 413 viewers. Remember to smash the like button. And if you send us a super chat, we'll read it out. The comments is occupied. This is from Drag Long. Thanks so much. The Commons is occupied by lords without title. They have the assets of lords, landlords. They have associated disaster with economic activity. Yeah, a type of disaster capitalism. Thanks so much for that. Sorry, Alex, you wanted to say something, and I interrupted you.
No. I was going to segue this into how does rejoining the EU, unlike your plug earlier about the giving money to the Rejoin EU party and this new system that was being mentioned, hint wink wink to everyone. So I was going to bring Howard to Richard. How does rejoining the EU benefit us economically? How does it help the average person on the street?
Just from an economic perspective.
Yeah, let's go for that.
Well, obviously, from the point of view of small businesses in our local community, one of the things that, and certainly we've always found this in the by-elections when we go around and talk to people trying to run businesses in their own communities, they come out with three problems. And there's three basic barriers to doing business now as a result of not being in the EU. Number one, they can't get the supplies that they want. A lot of mainland EU suppliers have decided it's just too much hassle to deal with companies in the UK, particularly small companies, and so they can't actually access the raw materials. And remember, many businesses have found themselves on very successfully importing particular imports from, for example, I was talking to one seed company that has seeds come from Spain and Italy, now just can't get the raw materials. Second problem, even if you can get the raw materials, the price has now gone up dramatically. Now, I know we've got this global inflationary spiral, but let's be frank, severing the just-in-time systems that connected us to the EU has been a major blow from that. And the Bank of England policymaker, Adam Rosen, basically did an analysis saying 80% of the current day-to-day inflation you've got based on food prices, materials, that sort of thing, is due to Brexit. So if people are concerned about the cost of living crisis and would like to try and do something about inflation, rejoining the single market and the customs union would be one of the most successful things that we could do. And indeed, Alex and I were chatting about this during the week, and we could even see when we rejoin the EU, as well as significant disinflation, we might even have a period of deflation very briefly as well, as a result of going back. And the third problem, of course, is freedom of movement, getting the expertise to actually be able to run your businesses come over, and particularly restaurateurs. I was talking to one restaurateur in Bexley who's having problems because he was running a Greek restaurant and wanted a particularly talented chef to come over and couldn't actually get them over to run their business. So these are some of the ways it's going to affect ordinary individuals. But if we move outside business and just look at our day-to-day spending patterns, obviously a lot of imported inflation. You cannot sever supply links and not expect things to be more expensive. That is a truism of Brexit.
So essentially we would have cheaper food if we just rejoined. We'd have a stronger pound, and all of that's going to boost the economy. There's obviously issues with improving a pound, trying to be a bit balanced here. I've seen that historically in the past. If you increase the value of your currency, that means there are other issues that entail with it. But in theory, more powerful pound, cheaper the price of the product coming in, less checks. I heard, I think it was City AM, the newspaper said that joys of the Conservatives in the moment. I mean, because the government decided not to do any import checks, all the ports spent millions on equipment that they now can't use. So they're now trying to recoup that money by charging import charges. And I'm not sure if it's the number of times it comes in or if it's per product. But apparently it's between £17, I think, per product to £25 per product or crate or item coming into the UK. That's gonna send inflation through the roof.
Well, of course, and it's not entirely surprising. I think you make a very good point about the strength of the pound as well. We need to remember that the day we had Brexit, the pound lost 20% of its value on the international exchanges, simply because of that decision. And of course, that makes all our imports more expensive, even though our exports are cheaper. We're currently not getting an export boom that's leading the economy the way that might have been boasted about. The assumption, therefore, has to be that should we rejoin the EU, we'd expect to see a 25% increase in the currency, which would translate to an immediate 20% drop in prices coming in. And let's remember, this is not just against the euro, this is against a global basket of currencies. So Brexit didn't just make imports from the EU more expensive, it made imports from the US more expensive, imports from Switzerland more expensive, imports from Australia more expensive because of the general value of the pound. So put to one side the whole arguments of efficiency about joining the euro, even if we were to rejoin the EU on the basis that we left, we would expect to see a huge boost in terms of the spending power of the pound, and we would expect to see the imports we come into the country much, much cheaper. Now, obviously, the flip side of that is, yes, exports would then become more expensive, and some of the exporting businesses may suffer as a result. But that's not the crisis we've got at the moment. The crisis is people having to choose between feeding their families, heating their homes, or travelling to work. These are the issues that we need to deal with, and rejoining the single market as an urgent issue is something I think is very, very important.
Can I just read out some more super chats we have? Dudley says, "Are you all getting ready to be re-educate yourselves on the use of pounds, shillings, and pence?" Definitely.
Absolutely. I think this is a marvellous idea. We decimalised in 1970, and let's be honest, it's still not working 52 years later. So why don't we just scrap it and go back to pounds, shillings, and pence? A marvellous argument then, I think.
And anything from history you'd like to see brought back? You know, if we're heading in that direction, you know, the penny farthing, maybe that's something that I think.
Yes. There was an old concept. I don't think many people have heard of this, but it used to be popular in my younger days, called honesty in politics. That's something I'm quite keen to see make a return. You know, not telling lies in Parliament, actually standing by your word, perhaps even, and this is a radical suggestion, printing manifestos in elections that you're actually obliged to follow when you're actually elected. So yeah, that's something I'd like to see.
Alex, why did we invite this comedian on? What's wrong? You know, this is meant to be a serious discussion.
Apologies. I'll put the sarcasm mode on.
I mean, can't. Maybe we should go back to the old school politicians, the Victorian period, where they used to, pay off slavery owners and and everything else in between. It's all a joke, isn't it? From start to finish. It's disturbing as well, to be honest. You used to think that the Conservative Party had a level of pragmatism to them, especially pre-1940s. There was a level of like, no, it's not about ideology, it's about pragmatism. They're so ideologically moved to the right. It's actually just totally damaging to everything that we've got going on in the economy, and they can't see it. And in many ways, they can't react to some of the damage that they're causing through Brexit because it's so ideologically driven. And Brexit has, done untold damage, but then they just add to it with stupid policies. I think one of the interesting things as well is what we're seeing with rental prices. Construction prices are going up, but also inflation, which means the mortgage is going to go up. So if the mortgage goes up and the landlord gets a mortgage, who's that going to get shunted? The landlord isn't going to pick up that tab. It's going to be shunted onto everyone. If we can reduce inflation, that means we can reduce the mortgage rates again, have them low level, which means that there's less pressure on renters. Because the government doesn't think along those lines. I'm confused because I would have thought that someone in the civil service would be mentioning these things to them, but it just escapes them.
I hope they do mention it to government. They just probably don't publish their advice publicly, and government choose to ignore it. But I think this point, and in a way, trivialising some of these things, such as pound, shilling, pence, and the imperial measurements, probably helps the government disguise some of the real damage it's doing, such as the Liz Truss bill on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And this is really, really worrying. One of the things I think we should remind people of, the paradox of Brexit, it was called at the time. When we had Brexit, the paradox of Brexit is you have to have a border between Britain and France. But you can't have a border between France and Ireland. You can't have a border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And you can't have a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. Now, Brexit was a choice. You had to choose one of those three things. And the government chose to go down the line of the Northern Ireland Protocol and put the border down the North Sea. Now, as well as obviously that being awful, and I have great sympathy with everyone in Northern Ireland who was never, ever consulted on any of this at any stage whatsoever. The Northern Ireland Protocol was effectively imposed as a one-way barrier between goods coming from Great Britain going into Northern Ireland. And now Liz Truss has got this bill where it appears she's going to breach our international agreement. And that is a very, very dangerous thing to do. And I would say this is symptomatic of what happens when you have someone completely untrustworthy at the top of government. If you've got someone who's a liar as your prime minister, it sets the culture for the entire government department. And that's why, while they're distracting us with these silly little things like imperial measurements, they're getting on with doing real damage to Britain's international reputation and showing that we can't actually stand by treaties that we agree. And I can understand why everyone in Northern Ireland is pretty angry about this.
I just want to read out some more super chats. We have Gareth once again who says on a note on slavery, the UK government effectively ended slavery, quote unquote, by buying all the slaves from the owners and thereafter set them free, sort of. A question for you, Richard. Does Richard have a big red bus in waiting?
A big red bus. That would be fantastic. Well, if you contribute to the fundraiser, my understanding is that hiring big red buses to go around in by-elections costs about £1,500 a pop. So a big red bus with something like "Where's our 350 million a day" on it would be something I would love to do if we had funds in one of those by-elections.
Have you considered talking to Led by Donkeys? You're familiar with Led by Donkeys?
Yeah.
So they organise a lot of. Just when I just thought of big red buses, I just think of their way of getting a message across. It could be something
I mean, they are fantastic communicators, and they do such a great job at trying to keep this government to account in the public mind with the stunts that they do. Any chance to work with them, yes, we jump at.
We have another one from Freddie B. Trying to get car parts from the UK to Ireland is ridiculous. Pay for parts and shipping. A supplier doesn't pay the VAT. It's stopped at customs, or you get caught for it. So I can't afford to fix a car. I've heard this story before. Yes, getting car parts is a real problem. And then of course there are the extra costs related to that. So it's not just the bureaucracy, but it's also the cost. And for example, my wife bought something from the UK recently. It arrived, and I had to pay €44 in customs on it. Now,
44?
I want 44.
What?
Yeah, the original cost was, I think, €200 or something like that, but the customs was 44. I think under a certain amount, if it's less than £20, you don't pay anything. But if it's over that, you pay a significant amount. But the consequence of that is, well, I said to her, we're not buying from this website again, unfortunately. Or if possible, we'll try to find it sourced in Europe. This is a big problem for British businesses, because they're trying to export, but if the customer is hit with a cost, a significant cost, €44, like a lot of people would say, okay, to hell with that, and you get burnt once, and then it's very difficult to get that. Even, and as Richard is saying, like about rejoining the EU. There's going to be, even with rejoining the EU, it'll take time to rebuild that trust, because if you have switched supplier to a German supplier, or if you're in the EU and you switch from a UK supplier to a German or French supplier, it's difficult for a British supplier to get that custom back. Even if you do rejoin the EU, I'm not saying not to rejoin. It's the best way to get back, into the market. Get into the EU, get into the single market and customs union, but it takes time. That's some of the unfortunate long-term damage Brexit is doing. It's not just if there's customers will switch back to British ones. You can lose a long-term customer because of something like Brexit, because of a customs duty that has to be paid.
And don't forget, a lot of these relationships are built up over decades, and it works both ways as well. My partner recently ordered something from the Eurozone. I think the cost of the item was something like £60, and the duty on it was something like £30-something it came out on when it came there. Again, never going to go to that website again. But when you think of how many businesses have built up these very, very slick, very, very low cost, just-in-time systems, and ultimately, the lower your costs, the more profit you make, but most of that is ultimately passed on to the consumer in competitive pricing. That is now gone. And again, that is going to be another upward pressure for long-term inflation if we stick with what we've got.
There's so many issues here. I've got 3 points to bring up. So the first one was, well, that's the whole point of paying the EU money, is that we don't get taxed. So we used to get a rebate from that tax as well. Now we get nothing. It's more expensive, and it all goes into the EU coffers. And they're just sitting back going, brilliant, we're just going to drain loads of money out the UK. We don't get any of that back. I mean, this is absolutely mad. Plus the 25% potentially. Is that almost double, Richard, that your partner paid?
It was quite close to double, but I think we worked out about 75-80%. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was about 75% of the price that he paid was on tax, the tariff that was imposed on top of it. And of course, the other thing to bear in mind is fraudsters also know this as well. So there's evidence of spurious text messages going around saying, oh, you owe £50 for your latest parcel. Click here to do so. And every time we get something like this, fraudsters move in to try and take advantage of people. And I don't know about you, but when we're adapting to a new system, I have to check out anything that comes in like that, because I'm thinking, if I've got a notice from the tax office, I just want to make sure it's legitimate, even though I think there's a 90% chance it's just a scam text.
And then I just think of elderly people who would not be as well informed, and they're likely to get scammed as well. Number 3 has a super chat. The world is getting warmer quickly. All of this drama is a distraction, though still important, of course. Yeah, and this is something that, we look at Brexit, we look at the war in Ukraine, but climate change is definitely something that, there's no focus on that, and it's being completely forgotten about.
I think you're right, Max. And just to say on that, Alex and I did a video together, the top 5 reasons for rejoining the EU, where Alex asked, what are the 5 biggest reasons for rejoining the EU? And the number 1 reason I've got that we want to rejoin the EU is because we cannot tackle the global catastrophe that's happening to this country by just building walls around ourselves and living in splendid isolation. It relies on, Brendan was saying earlier on about intra-national organizations governing things at the appropriate level. And when it comes to climate change, you have to unite with other parties to do it. Now, whether we like it or not, there are pretty much only 4 significant global players around: the US, the EU, Russia, and China, when it comes to marshalling resources and putting them to play. And the EU, whilst I would say is probably the most progressive on climate change, needs kicking. It does need kicking, and it needs us there in the EU to join with them and kick upwards to try and solve this. So I think number 3 is absolutely right there. And everything we do at the moment should be done in the context of a looming global catastrophe. We are now living in an age where my great-grandchildren will not be able to survive on the surface of planet Earth if we carry on the way that we are going at the moment. And so I totally agree with that super chat.
Wow.
Alex, do you want to say something about that? Sorry, what did you say?
I said that's a cheerful note to end on.
Yes. We're almost out of time, so I just want to read out some more super chats. If you codify your constitution, would you be in favour of requiring a supermajority in each UK Parliament or Assembly to change it? And someone said, bring back the rag and bone man. Just something on the constitution, Alex. Do you want to mention something about having a codified constitution, the benefits or the costs related to that?
It depends on how the constitution is written up, and I'm always an advocate of keeping it quite simple. There are problems with that as well, but it means that everyone sort of has an idea of what their rights are. It's clear, and in theory means that people can go, no, you can't do that, and protect certain key elements that I think everyone agrees are important. Freedom of protest, or right to protest, freedom of assembly, right to free speech. There's obviously limitations to all of these still, and even within US Congress. But yeah, I think you need I would change the House of Lords into a proportional system, and then have it by I'd have 2-chamber parliament, and I think that would eliminate a lot of the problems. And then you'd have to either throw it to a referendum to the populace, where you'd need a supermajority, 70%, or you would have to throw it to, and you'd have to throw it to each of the other parliaments that we have, or other assemblies, so Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and they'd also have to have a majority. And that means that it's possible to change it, but it's very difficult, and you'll probably get a lot of backlash in doing that. And in the present system, we don't have that ability. You just need a simple majority. Like, Parliament does not have to really listen to anything of the past. There's some philosophical debate over that, as to where power comes from and whether or not that can be done. But yeah, that's my take on it. What about you, Richard?
I think there's a very attractive idea of having a supermajority constitution, which can only be changed by, say, 60% of the population or 65% voting. The problem is, where does the initial constitution come from? And if you're talking about a gentle constitutional revolution, in other words, going through Parliament, you're left with the reality that Boris Johnson could impose a constitution today. He could use his 44% of the vote to use everyone in Parliament to come out with a constitution, and then put the constitution in power so that more than 60 or 65% is needed to change it. And I don't know exactly what you'd have in a constitution, but I think I'd probably find it quite a horrific constitution to actually have. So in principle, I totally agree, but it is getting the initial package recognised by the populace in an appropriate way. And where you say there, you implied in what you said there, getting agreement from Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland and England. It's very unlikely that without the most pale constitution possible, that you would get that unanimity. And if you fail to do so, then you're back where you started. So yes, in practice, I agree. I worry about the practical issues. And just to disagree with you slightly, I think in an ideal system, we should have a three-chamber system. We should have a partisan democracy, we should have a non-partisan representative democracy, and we should have a technocratic house as well with experts that feed into each other and balance what we do. And the reason I would cite for that is we have been victim of information warfare. Brexit was information warfare. I would argue the last election was information warfare as well. The only way to protect against that is to have three chambers, each monitoring each other from different backgrounds, but the majority being democratic accountability.
It's very interesting and something definitely to chew over. So I think we've come to the end of the brunch for today. Alex, is there anything you'd like to add before we finish for today?
Yeah. Our final show for the season is next week. And we're throwing it over to everyone in the chat. Who do you want on? Whoever you want, vote for. Just write down into the chat who you want to have on our final show. And at the end of the show, Max and myself will go through it and we will add up the tally, and then we'll go and approach these people and say, this is who's voted for you. Would you like to join us? The other thing is we're starting up a brand new channel. It's called the Sunday Roast. It starts in September. You'll see a link in the description. Please click on that, become a subscriber, because we're going to get that channel up and running. And I think we'll also, obviously we need 1,000 to really get all the background stuff that YouTube gives us the power to really make the channel quite powerful. We've also got the Rejoin EU party. It's their fundraiser day today. So please click on the link in the description for them, because they're obviously really important in getting us back into the EU, at least the beginning and the first steps to doing it. And please become a subscriber of their channel. There you go. 3 plugs.
Very good. So once again, thanks, Richard, for coming on today. Thanks to Alex
for having me, guys.
For the wonderful co-host, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Remember to post who you'd like to see at the next Sunday brunch in the chat, and we'll see you next week. Thanks once again, Richard. Thanks, Alex, and hopefully, Richard, we can have you back again soon.
Look forward to it. Even the thought of Sunday roast is starting to make me hungry. So,
just in time. Okay. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone for the super chats, and thanks for everyone for smashing the like button and for coming on. And remember to keep an eye on the Sunday Roast channel, as it's be up and running pretty soon.